The cornfield at night is a sight both peaceful and unsettling. Rows of tall stalks standing motionless, moonlight causing maze-like paths between them to cast long shadows. The hoot of an owl or rustling of small animals may break the silence briefly, but a sense of solitude lingers heavy in the air. Venture too far into these isolated fields, however, and you may realize you're not alone at all. Sinister things creep between those crop rows under cover of night. This is no urban legend. What you are about to hear are 3 terrifying true stories of those who have lived to tell their chilling cornfield encounters. The Cornfield Stalker. The old McCutcheon farm had stood abandoned since the 80s, the house in disrepair and fields long gone to seed. Only the barn and the sprawling corn maze behind it remained as creepy landmarks in the rural town of Glaston. The dilapidated farm was a favorite hangout for local teenagers, often getting drunk or high among the empty animal stalls and faded farming equipment. One Friday night, 5 high school students, Brad, Heather, Michael, Lindsay and Kyle, met up at McCutcheon's around midnight. They brought some beers and a bottle of whiskey to share as they explored the property. Making their way to the back 40, they came upon the intricate corn maze. It stretched out nearly 2 acres, enclosed by towering stalks, browned with decay. Lindsay hesitated at the entrance, getting an uneasy feeling, but she reluctantly followed her friends into the gloomy labyrinth. About 20 minutes in, after many disorienting twists and turns, the group realized something was wrong. The scuffling footsteps and occasional snapping sounds made it obvious they were not alone. At first they figured it was just another daring teen from town, but soon a menacing shape began to stalk them from a distance, visible only as an inky black silhouette under the moonlight. When they switched on flashlights, the beams reflected off cold, animal-like eyes in the darkness before their pursuer darted swiftly out of sight. Now, recognizing the danger, panic set in. The group tried desperately to find their way out, but became more lost amongst the corridors of swaying stalks. That's when Heather glanced back and saw it clearer, a hulking form loping after them almost inhumanly fast. She could barely make out stringy hair, ripped clothing and milky limbs that seemed to spider crawl across the ground. Heather screamed it was right behind them. The teens scattered in different directions, whisper shouting each other's names while heavy footfalls of the creature echoed around them. Brad and Kyle managed to escape the maze completely and sprinted back towards the farmhouse. But Heather, Lindsay and Michael's cries for help became more and more distant until silence took over. Brad used Kyle's cell phone to call 911 while Kyle ran to get his truck. Sheriff's deputies responded, combing the maze and barn with spotlights and dogs. But there was no sign of the missing teens, no trail could be picked up either. The only evidence found was Lindsay's bracelet on the ground and some blood-soaked tatters of Michael's shirt dangling from a broken cornstalk. Over the next few weeks, multiple search parties were organized to investigate the surrounding countryside. Detectives interviewed locals regarding any prowlers that may be responsible, but no suspects were ever identified. Heather, Lindsay and Michael simply vanished that night in the cornfield maze. Some in town murmur that a vengeful spirit haunts McCutcheon Farm, a trespasser in the fields who ended up buried there long ago. The screams in the night. Jed Hansen had lived on his family's farmstead outside the small town of Willow Valley nearly his whole life. His family harvested hundreds of acres of corn, wheat and soybeans over 3 generations. Now Jed mostly worked the land alone after losing his wife and parents over the years. The old farmhouse and endless fields were his sole companions. One night in late October, Jed awoke well past midnight to an abrupt, gut-wrenching scream from outside. He sprang up, heart thumping as the shriek echoed over the countryside again. It was a woman in absolute distress. The horrible wailing went on for over a minute before fading out. Jed dressed quickly and grabbed his flashlight. Making sure his shotgun was loaded, he cautiously headed into the moon-washed night. The crop fields around the house rustled gently, blanketing the landscape. Jed swept his flashlight beam over the closest cornfield that stretched long and wide behind the barn. Nothing unusual. After searching around by the outbuildings, trees and ditches, he started to second-guess just where such an intense scream could have originated from. The whole area was desolate, not a house or highway for miles. No one was wandering around out here at this hour. Jed reluctantly went back inside, but the next night, the screams returned. From then on, at least 2 to 3 times a week between midnight and 3 a.m. Those same shrill cries pierced the quiet farm. Jed would leap into urgent action, yelling into the darkness and scouring his fields. Each time, though, he came up empty-handed. No signs of people or footprints, no odd vehicles on perimeter roads. He called the county sheriff, who sent a deputy to inspect over the next few nights. The deputy witnessed nothing out of the ordinary. He suggested perhaps a wild animal was causing the ruckus. But Jed knew these were human screams, the screams of a woman meeting a horrific end. Though muffled by distance, they contained undeniable distress and agony. Why couldn't he pinpoint their origin? The phenomena plagued his thoughts daily. Then late one August night, as Jed sat waiting nervously with the deputy, the screams arose from directly north this time, from the old cornfield behind the red barn. Jed and the deputy bolted out of the house, weapons drawn. The cries were louder and more intense than ever before, echoing across the stalks. As they plunged into the dark maze of corn, an abrupt silence once again froze the night. They continued searching for the source relentlessly between the rows, finding no clues to explain the ongoing mystery. Jed felt icy eyes upon them, even if he saw nothing. In the days following, Jed sadly decided to sell the farm that had been family-owned for generations. He moved to Florida, having had enough of the bizarre happenings never explained. A local legend arose that the farm was haunted by Matilda Hurst, a young woman brutally murdered in that very cornfield 80 years prior by a jealous lover. Her screams eternally lingered any time someone drew too close to her unmarked gravesite, buried out there still undiscovered to this day. The corn hag, 12-year-old Bobby, was bored out of his mind. His mom dragged him and his older sister Anna to visit their aunt's rural Iowa farmstead for a week. Auntie Em was a shut-in who never left her creepy Victorian house filled with dolls and cats. With nothing to do, Bobby dared his sister on Tuesday to explore the strange cornfield bordering the unused south pasture. Anna led the way into the abandoned field, each stalk over 6 feet tall. The crops were odd, withered leaves clinging to bent husks covered in fungus. As they ventured deeper, Anna halted with a gasp, pointing ahead. 30 feet farther stood a hunched crone, facing away, dressed in tattered black, with stringy white hair. As the pair hesitated, she slowly turned to reveal a face nearly skeletal. Wet grey flesh dripped from her cheekbones as she peered at them through filmy dead eyes. Opening her mouth emitted an ungodly hiss through mossy teeth. Bobby stumbled backward, but Anna stood frozen. The hag lifted a ragged arm, skin in papery shreds, extending a gnarled finger towards them. In a brittle screech, she rasped, "Get out!" Anna grabbed her brother's hand, and they fled through rotten stalks. But as they ran, more elderly figures began to rise on either side of them from the rows of decaying corn. Their lifeless gazes followed the panicked children stumbling over the furrowed earth. Hideous, wart-covered noses sniffed at the air like animals, and bony arms reached out trying to grasp at the terrified siblings. These horrific corn hags were surrounded by an eerie, unnatural mist that seemed to cling to their tattered skirts. Their stringy white hair hung long and limp around faces with wet grey flesh dripping from protruding cheekbones. Anna and Bobby felt cold breath on their necks, even as they desperately pushed past reaching claws to escape the deathly field. Finally, they burst out onto Aunt Em's back pasture, the safety of open grassland before them. Collapsing beside the fence posts, the shaken kids struggled to catch their breath, heartbeats racing. "What was that?" Bobby cried out, wiping away tears. Anna just shook her head, at a loss for words. The nightmarish images of those demonic crones and their chilling cries would be seared into the siblings' minds forevermore. After several minutes huddled together, Anna and Bobby warily made their way back to the farmhouse. However, their mother proved highly skeptical of the far-fetched story about ancient cornfield witches, chalking it up to bored imaginations running wild in isolation. But Aunt Em just smiled strangely, knowing well what lurked deep within that south field herself from decades ago. Over the next couple of days, the kids avoided the haunting cornfield, still wafting faint screams. Their mother dismissed their fears as she busied herself helping Aunt Em. But curiosity and pride have led many astray, and on their last day visiting, it got the better of both siblings once more as adventure called despite the horror lodged in their souls. So next time you pass an abandoned cornfield at dusk, look closer. Is that a figure standing silent within the stalks? We may never unravel those rural secrets. Consider yourself cautioned, the forsaken crops crave new victims. Share your chilling cornfield encounters below, and don't forget to like, comment and subscribe if you dare hear more disturbing true tales born from what looms in the shadows of the harvest moon.